Hello, hi everybody. I didn't say clap, but that's okay too. All right, so we're gonna get started, right? It's Friday night, yes? Yes, let's keep this tight. All right, so we're gonna ask that everyone come in, take your seat, zip it up, and get ready to listen. Yes? Yes. Let's go.
Thanks, Ms. Marshall, Dr. Marshall. Welcome, everybody. Thank you guys so much for coming. My name is Gregory Miller. I'm a senior at Phillips Exeter, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming to Exeter's first student forum on gun violence. I hope you're all as excited as I am to be participating in an honest discussion about gun legislation in New Hampshire and how it affects all of us. More than just hearing the facts about gun violence in New Hampshire, I think the purpose of tonight is to bring life to those facts and to really begin to understand them on a human level, not necessarily a statistical or political one. And in order to do that, we've left half the time tonight to you guys, the audience, for your questions, so you can ask these panelists what it means to be behind a desk in government fighting for these issues, and what it means to be even under a desk on a lockdown drill. That's the reality. But that is something that all too often is lost in the numbers and in the partisan rhetoric, and that's something we hope to rectify tonight. Lastly, I hope that after hearing these voices, you all internalize what you hear and inform your vote come November, so that you're best prepared to decide what you want this state to represent on a national level and for future generations. That being said, let's meet our panelists. Oh, second note, we have these very lovely how to register to vote pamphlets at the front, made by Ava. They're really nice, and if you aren't registered, please check them out, because that's what this is all about. So our panelists, our student panelists, we'll start with from Cooperative Middle School. We have two of the most dedicated, coolest middle schoolers I've ever met, Ella and Betty. From Phillips Exeter, we have Jordan and Caladria. And from Exeter High School, we have founding members of Blue Hawks on gun control, Ava and Will. In terms of the adults, we have... In terms of the adults, we have Deborah Altschuler, representative for the town of Stratham, and Haven Domestic Violence Intervention. Patrick Abrami, another representative from Stratham. Ellen Reed, representative for the town of Newfields. Leonard Korn, president of the New Hampshire Medical Society. Dennis Magliosi, English teacher at Exeter High. And Chris Pappas, current executive counselor. And our moderator tonight is,
And we have the pleasure of having Senator Fuller Clark with us tonight as well. So,
thank you. Our moderator for tonight is Dr. Courtney Marshall, an English teacher at Phillips Exeter. And we have a number of other representatives here in the audience tonight. Thank you guys so much for coming to listen and being a part of the democratic process. If you guys could please stand and we can recognize you. two more quick things. One, before we get started, I'd like to just read out quickly the names of those who were invited who could not be here tonight. That includes Governor Chris Sununu, the police chiefs for Exeter and Stratham, Senator William Gannon, Senator Innes, Executive Councilor Russell Prescott, and Representative Alan Cook and Scott Wallace, both from Brentwood. And lastly, I'd just like to thank Water Street Bookstore for being our sponsor for tonight. Thank you guys so much. It means a lot. So without further ado, we're going to have some statements from the students, and that starts with Ella.
Hello, I'm Ella Horvath, and I'm a 7th grader at the Cooperative Middle School in Stratham. Throughout my years as a student, I have attended public school and have always thrived surrounded by supportive teachers who make the classroom environment a safe and nurturing place. I am fortunate enough to say that though I have never been a victim of gun violence, I have participated in recurrent school lockdown drills alongside my classmates and have watched news reports, anecdotes, and speeches from across our nation that, in the words of Angie Thomas, make this political issue personal to me. Without further action, students like me could dread approaching their teachers for fear that they have a gun concealed beneath their desk, or could be too terrified to go to school because of the ever-looming threat of gun violence. As we confront these phobias, we must remember that for many children across the nation, gun violence is not a recent issue, but something to be confronted every day in all aspects of their lives. And in this process, let's remember their stories too. I hope that tonight, we as a Seacoast community can come together to share our concerns, gain perspective, and present possible solutions to the gun violence epidemic that currently plagues our nation. I'm so impressed by the efforts of the youth across America as we find our voices, and I'm proud to be here tonight with you to gain further perspective for future activism.
Hi, I'm Caladria Aguilar. I'm from Phillips Exeter Academy, and I'm a lower. A man that I look up to and has guided me in my life always tells me to speak from your heart. I am not here to propose a policy change. I am not here to state my political side. I am not here to ask you to vote for someone in particular in November. I am here as a student activist who has never experienced gun violence, and I want to tell you why I care. I am tired. One life, two lives, more lives, tired. Shots to your chest. You can feel your heart beating even slower as the seconds go by. You feel the bullets as they fly past the fine hairs on your head. Your hands are cold. You are cold and alone and afraid. And you wait until anyone comes to help you. But no one is there to help you. They read your name on the obituary list. Your name gets plastered on poster boards for people to glance at, but never know how it felt to those victims' mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers when they realized you had been murdered. They will never know why. And I am tired of not knowing, because I don't know if I am next. I don't want to be another headline on a news station for people to glance at. I don't want to be another name on a poster board. I don't want strangers sending my mother their thoughts and prayers. I want action, and I am tired. What about you? New Hampshire, you have low murder rates. You have low levels of police brutality. You have no gun regulation. But are we going to wait until a mass shooting occurs in this state to change laws that make it easier to purchase firearms? Are we going to wait until your children are filled with bullet holes? I don't know how much humanity you have to lose in order to be okay with shootings, because I'm not okay. I'm not okay with police shootings, mass shootings, school shootings. I watched the video of Parkland students fleeing classrooms as bullets left holes on the chalkboards. I couldn't bring myself to imagine those victims dead, to see blood seeping out of their bodies or the glassing over their eyes. I watched the video of Sahid Faisal and other victims of police brutality. I saw his bloodied, murdered body. I imagined my black stepfather then, his own body riddled with holes from bullet wounds. I have heard stories of women's vaginas being fired into with bullets, rendering them unable to have a child. and able to use the bathroom without her body burning. If we do not act now, New Hampshire, this is what our world, our community, can become. Thank you.
I'm Ava Luponis. I'm a junior at Exeter High School. On February 14th, we were in shock. Frozen in front of our television screens, we were faced yet again with the unthinkable reality of mass shootings in America. We had seen it before in Las Vegas and Orlando, in Columbine and Sandy Hook. These 4 incidents alone amounted in over 1,000 injured and killed. For a student in America, this isn't a matter of thoughts and prayers. This is your heart racing when you see an unfamiliar figure in the halls, when you're not sure if the lockdown is really a drill or not. This is clear backpacks. This is metal detectors. This is drills and searches and evacuations. This is not safety. On March 14th, we stood in solidarity, in peaceful protest and in grief. We stood in silence for 17 minutes to respect and contemplate the lives lost just 1 month earlier that had sparked the movement and demanded justice. Justice for, not for retribution, but rather to prevent more innocent lives from being stolen by some $100 million in corporate donations to our political system. Today, I sit before you, elected officials and electorate, in request that we rethink and reform our current legislation on firearms. We can take charge of the future of this town, of this state, and of this nation. So let's have a conversation on realistic change and compromise.
Hi everyone, my name is Jordan Davidson and I'm a junior from Phillips Exeter Academy. So the first question is directed at Dr. Korn, who's the president of the New Hampshire Medical Society. So Dr. Korn, New Hampshire has exceeded the national average suicide rate per state every single year since 2006. Just 2 years ago, in 2016, New Hampshire had the 14th highest suicide rate in the nation. Over 50% of those who took their life that year used a firearm to do so. How have you, a prominent member of the medical field in New Hampshire, seen how gun violence has contributed to rising suicide rates, and what course of action do you believe is best for our state so that these deaths can be prevented?
Yeah, I'm a psychiatrist, as well as president of the New Hampshire Medical Society, and we're a lucky state in that we have a very small number of homicides, but that's not the case regarding suicides, and it's not the case regarding suicide with guns. I've been involved with gun control issues for many years. 4 years ago, the New Hampshire Medical Society passed a beginning attempt at gun control initiatives. At that time, we supported universal background checks. We supported gun locks and other safety features, and we also supported the turning in of patients who are committed to involuntarily, usually to the state hospitals, but sometimes to other hospitals, have their names sent to the National Registry. Well, New Hampshire doesn't send the names of patients who are committed to the National Registry. It's a request from the federal government, but so far our state doesn't do that. But those policies, although they would be helpful, are clearly not enough. And it was ironic, Jordan, that on February 14th, we, in the New Hampshire Medical Society Executive Council, were discussing a much more comprehensive policy for gun regulations in the very afternoon that the mass killing at Marjorie Stoneham High School was going on in Florida. We did pass a comprehensive gun regulations. The first, it has 5 features. The first feature was to repeal the Dickey Amendment and other laws that exist. Believe it or not, there are laws that exist that prevent the CDC and other federal agencies from doing research on gun violence. Well, that's pretty amazing considering that there were 38,000 gun deaths last year in the United States alone. So that was our first additional proposal. The second additional proposal was to ban assault rifles, not merely to regulate them, but to ban them, to ban bump stocks, and to ban high-velocity bullets. In medicine, we've seen the difference between a high-velocity bullet and a regular bullet as to what it does to organs and bones. It shatters them. Regular bullets pass through, and if it's not a vital organ, somebody can survive. Even if it's a vital organ, it's a little hole. But not high-velocity rounds. They destroy whatever they come in contact with. It's really incredible. So that's our second new policy. Our third new policy is for gun owners to be licensed and to pass safety tests, and for all guns to be registered. We register cars. In fact, safety features in cars, seats, all kinds of safety features have reduced motor vehicle accidents leading to death. We don't do anything like that regarding guns. So that's our third new proposal. Our fourth is that we support gun violence restraining orders. So if people feel that somebody is in danger of harming somebody else, they can go to a court or the police department and get an emergency restraining order so that guns can be removed, and also that they would be put on the national data bank so they couldn't purchase a gun. We also support now what are referred to as red flag laws. So if somebody is arrested or charged with domestic violence or stalking, that they would have their guns removed and that they would also be put on the list. Now, we do feel that when guns are removed and people are put on the National Data Bank, that there ought to be an ability in due process for them to get their names taken off the list. So we also support that in terms of a court action for that. And finally, we support physicians being able to talk to their patients about guns and risks and to that effect. So we've passed all of those policies. Those will be helpful only in the context of the great movement that students like you have instilled in our country. Many of us have been interested in these issues for a long time, and we know that comprehensive gun regulations can be of great assistance. We actually don't have a lot of research data. We have some, but not a lot. We wish we had a lot more. But I just want to commend you students who are here today and the students in the United States who are really leading this charge. We need you, and we hope that with your energy, we'll get somewhere finally. Thank you very much.
My name is Will Baker, and I'm from Exeter High School. So my question is addressed to anyone on the panel who would like to answer it. And so there is no law in New Hampshire for gun-free school zones right now. So why is there no gun-free school zone law? And what steps would we need to take in order to sponsor a bill or something like that for gun-free zone schools?
I'll jump in to start and let you know.
Put the microphone closer to your mouth, please, for those of us who are hearing impaired. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, I can. So, Will, thank you very much for your question, and want you to know that we hear you and we're trying. And coming up next week, Representative Tamara Lay from Northampton, who currently sits on the Education Committee, is bringing forward an amendment to a bill that is before the Education Committee right now. And her amendment was an amendment that went through the Senate already, and we were not successful in the Senate, but we're going to try again in the House. And her amendment is to allow school districts to set their own policies about whether they want to be gun-free school zones. And it's supported by the Superintendent's Administration organization here in the state, and has a lot of support from school boards. So right now, there's a piece of legislation that's going to be sitting in front of a committee this Tuesday, and they'll be talking about that. So getting in touch with members of the Education Committee in the House of Representatives and let them know that you would like support of the Tamara Lay amendment. That's helpful right there. So there's one thing that's happening. And I'll let other representatives and Senator Fuller Clark speak to some other ones.
So I wanted to speak for a moment to the fact, as was just alluded to, that we did have legislation that came before the Senate about 3 weeks ago that was put forth by Senator Martha Hennessy from the Hanover area, which again was to create safe school zones. And before that, we had legislation that was put forth by a number of senators, which was and these are Democratic senators, to forbid bump stocks in New Hampshire. Unfortunately, both of those pieces of legislation failed in the Senate. They failed on a partisan vote. They went down to 10 to 14. All the Democrats voting to support those measures and all of the Republicans voting against it. Unfortunately, what we had to listen to on the floor of the Senate 3 weeks ago was very intense speeches from the Republicans about how the way to address this problem was to arm teachers in all of our schools across the state. It was incredibly demoralizing, but what it did for me was to realize that the only way we're going to really solve this problem is to get rid of assault weapons and to because we don't want our children to go to school with teachers who are armed. We don't want teachers to have to feel that the responsibility for keeping their children safe is on their shoulders. We don't want teachers who don't have any training and don't want to be trained in how to use a gun. We don't want to have guns available in classrooms where students might be able to access them. It simply is not the right solution. In addition to that, we need to remind ourselves that why, some of the most heinous gun attacks have taken place in our schools. And I remember when I was running for Congress after Columbine that I worked very hard to distribute gun locks to any family or gun owner who wanted them. We were able to, I think, to place around the 1st District about 200 gun locks that people agreed to take home with them. But we couldn't get a requirement that gun manufacturers in New Hampshire, and we have 2 big gun manufacturers in New Hampshire, would have to provide gun locks with the guns that they sold. Now that's another piece to go forward, because we also know that when guns are available in the homes, we either see suicide or we see horrific accidents where very young children may have found a gun and the gun is loaded and it ends up going off and a playmate, a brother or sister is killed. What could be worse? But all deaths by guns are horrific. So what we also need to do, because we know how many people in this country already have assault weapons, is we have to ban the magazines so that they no longer can purchase the bullets to be able to use those guns. So it's a... But we can't do that, unfortunately, with the people who are currently in office, because they continually vote down these common sense measures. So I want to give great accolades to the students from Parkland, because I think one of all the remarkable things that they have done is the fact that they have decided to expose and go after every elected official, every individual who's running for elective office that has received money from the NRA. So those are, my thoughts and an explanation for why we can't move common sense legislation that would really protect all of us forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I would just like...
Amen. Okay. And we've
briefly add, you've already heard several measures that have been put forward to try to regulate this. But what we haven't talked about is the slew of bills that we have had, most of which have passed to actually deregulate guns. And that has happened. I'm a freshman representative, and I've seen probably about a dozen bills, and most of which have passed, including just yesterday one that redefines the definition of loaded so that now we can have loaded rifles in moving vehicles in this state. So the answer to your question is to stay on top of every single one of these bills, use the momentum that the youth has right now, and pressure these representatives and senators to stop voting the way that they're currently voting, or some of them are currently voting, and to actually support some of these regulations that we've been attempting.
Great. Oh, okay. So one more comment, and then we have one more question.
I just want to clarify that that's loaded guns on farms, correct? It was loaded guns on farms only. That the farmers asked for this so that they could shoot varmints from their vehicles.
That they can pass on roads, farmers or their agents, and the lawyer that looked at that said anybody can be an agent.
That's not what I heard, but that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have one more question from the students for our panelists.
This is directed to any
anybody who would close up to the mic. Sorry. She fixing it.
When I think about increased security in schools, it makes me feel like school is almost turning in.
Get the microphone really close to your mouth.
Like this close?
Do what Beyonce would do. Close.
When I think about increased security in schools, it makes me feel like school has almost turned into like a prison. How do you feel about arming teachers versus increasing sensible gun control? And this is directed to anybody who would like to answer.
Yes.
I don't mean to jump out there, but just because I'm a teacher representative on the panel, I think I'd like to weigh in on that one. My response to that, I've been thinking about this in kind of a threefold manner. First of all, to arm teachers seems to me to be a militaristic response as opposed to one that is encouraging a culture of care, which is something that I think I got into this business for more than I did to be an armed teacher. To that point as well, there was an earlier comment that it is not the responsibility of the teacher to protect their students, but it is the responsibility of the teacher to protect their students. It's just not with a gun. We are here to be aware of what's happening in our community, and I think that what we're doing right now is a great representation of that. It's part of the democratic process. It is an engaged process in that we are both speaking and listening to each other, and that trade-off is, to me, more powerful than any firearm that I could ever bring into a classroom. So that's my first point. I would just say this as well. It has not come to my attention that anyone has ever said that if teachers were armed in a school, if you'll join me in a little thought experiment for a moment, everyone in the school, or let's say 20% of the teachers are armed in the school, a mass shooter comes in, and let's say that person gets 7 students and or teachers before a teacher is able to take that person out instead of 14. Is that the society and world that we are going to decide that we're okay with? Is that the place that we can say we've become successful? To my mind, that is not success at all. That's just, I guess, a Band-Aid on the problem, a problem that we still haven't solved. I think part of the solution to this problem does have to do with what other members of the panel have already stated, but I think something that isn't stated enough is that we need to be here as caring members of a community, both students, teachers, and the community itself, parents, and whoever else is a member of that community.
I agree with you about not arming teachers. We do have potentially others. Some are suggesting possibly volunteers that are ex-policemen volunteering to help patrol and all of that. But I think this whole discussion is missing one big thing, and that's mental and behavioral health issues. And if you look at the profile of the mass killers, they were all men, young men. They were all at Sandy Hook and Parkland. And there was a couple of folks in Aztec, New Mexico. There were 19-year-old, 20-year-old, 21-year-old shooters. And after the shootings, what did everybody say? We all knew that they were going to blow up one day. We all knew that family members, police officers knew that they were a problem. Now, Doctor, I agree with you about I've been researching this about the red flag laws. I think that's a great solution, red flag laws. 6 states have enacted red flag laws: California, Washington, Oregon, Indiana, which is a very conservative state, Florida, right after Parkland, and Connecticut. And Connecticut was one of the first because of their tragedy there. And what the doctor mentioned is what happens is it's only a family member or police can identify someone who's really behaviorally got problems. and is actually not only have problems, expresses that they might take this out in a mass way, or even an individual way. And what happens is there's a temporary order for upwards of 21 days. They take the gun away, any guns away, and then what they do is that then there's a court hearing, and the person has a chance to defend themselves. If they don't pass that, the gun's taken away for a year, and then after a year, they go back to court, and we see where we're at. Again, I think this is a great way of screening out because here's the problem with all of this, is that everybody has civil liberties. And the big problem about background checks over the years has been getting medical records about the mental state. You can probably agree to this, doctor, that because of HIPAA laws and other things, very hard to get the fact that this person is not stable. This, I think, is an approach. There's 6 states that are doing it. We'll see how this pans out over time, but this is, and I'm a Republican, everybody, I think most of you know that. I would actually support this kind of legislation. I would back that. I'd work with any of my Democratic friends on this, and we'll see where that pans out. But I think this is a good way of identifying the wrong person that has a gun, and I think that's very important. Thank you.
Would I be able to make a comment about that? So yeah, I completely agree with you, and I understand the profile of these shooters, and especially the school shooters, but you said they're young males, and they've often been diagnosed with mental illness. But I think that, it's not the government's job to be able to regulate each individual and their mental illness. It's the government's job to be able to ensure our safety, and the easiest way to do that is by regulating firearms. And if and I'm not, I'm going to be 18 this year, and unfortunately I won't be able to vote in these midterm elections, but if I were to vote, I'm not going to vote for a representative who has, because they think that they can mandate things that can kind of improve mental health, and that they have the stance to do that, and they have the experience to do that, although that would be great, and I think we should work toward that. The immediate solution is to ban firearms, and especially assault weapons.
Except can I follow up? Can I follow up on that, please? Can I?
And then we have
Okay, that's fine. But I mean, Martha said we want to ban assault weapons. So what? What happens is they still can come into school with a backpack full of even just regular handguns and do damage. So just banning assault weapons isn't the solution either. It doesn't stop the shooter to come into the... All right. I'll leave it at that. I mean, we would not accept that kind of booing in the State House, just so you know. I mean, I'm trying to be as open and as fair as possible. And I think that every shooting is a tragedy, every single one of them. Okay? But when I look at it, I'm an engineer. I look at this in a systematic way, and I see there's a pattern here, and I see that there's a pattern, and the pattern is that we have shooters with mental illness that needs to be caught up on and try to be diagnosed.
Okay, thank you. There was a hand over here. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'll just say this. Arming teachers is the most ridiculous idea I've heard of, and we shouldn't be arming our teachers. We should be arming our teachers with the tools that they need to teach and the resources they need to give the best positive education they can for our kids' future. As a state, the executive branch, the governor and council, has spent millions of dollars recently on security upgrades for local districts. They're coming to districts near you, including this SAU, to essentially provide the security, the doors, the equipment that we need to keep our kids safe in this environment. But what about public venues like this? What about churches and movie theaters and malls and other public places where we've seen these mass incidences of gun violence? The fact is, we do need to take steps to keep our schools safe. Arming teachers isn't one way to do that, But what we do need at a very basic level is to take these weapons off the streets that are capable of mowing people down and creating mass slaughter. So that's where we've got to go as a state.
Lovely.
And there aren't enough dollars available to lock every school down, lock every public place down. We've got to go after the weapons which are responsible for these actions. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment about mental health. It is true that in the mass shootings in schools, we have seen most, if not all, of those situations involving mental illness. However, most of the homicides in the country are not done by people who suffer from, put it this way, people who suffer from mental illness who have ever been in counseling or therapy or seen a psychiatrist. They are in homes, they have guns, they are angry people, and they commit murders. And it is important that we have red flag laws. I agree with Representative Abrami on that. It is important to have gun violence restraining orders, but without a comprehensive policy dealing with so many aspects of gun violence, we are not going to have a great improvement on the incredible gun violence that we have in our country. And we have 20 to 25% more gun violence in our country than any usual Western democracies. So we have a long way to go. We have so many guns, and we need to register them. We need to license gun owners, and we need to certainly remove guns from people who we identify are potentially dangerous. But there's no reason for assault rifles to be in the hands of anybody other than military or police.
Great. Thank you. Great.
Yes, thank you, Representative, or thank you, Doctor, and thank you, Representative. I agreed with everything that you said in terms of the importance that needs to be placed on mental health and the red flags laws, but it just confounds me because mental health has been an underaddressed issue since long before even Columbine. And it bothers me that once we start to talk about regulating these weapons of mass destruction, because that is what they are, then all of a sudden the same people who never cared about talking about mental health want to talk about mental health. And I have yet to see this group of people who claim now that mental health is the answer to this entire problem actually start funding mental health.
That's beautiful. All right, so thank you. So we have questions that were written on the strips of paper, but actually the last question that was asked was about arming teachers. And as a moderator, I get to do this. I would like the students on the panel to weigh in on what they think about arming teachers.
Speaking as someone who would be sitting in a class, and if I knew that the teacher who was standing up in front of me was carrying a weapon in order to protect me, the amount of anxiety that I would be under is just incomprehensible. And I don't think that's any way for me to feel more safe. Because if anything, that makes me feel far less safe.
I think that it would be if we're worried about safety here, I think that bringing more guns into schools is the absolute opposite direction we should be going.
I've spoken with some of my teachers about this, and I know that their response to this was that they would not want to be the person who had a gun in the school. They would not want to have to be standing in the front of the classroom with a gun and feel that if someone were to come into the school, they would be the one responsible to shoot them. And I don't think that arming teachers is the answer to solving this problem.
Yes. All right. So now we're going to get to our questions. So as you saw, we had a box where student and citizen. I would really like to privilege questions from people who are marked down as students. The rest of y'all will be all right. I care. All right. But actually, this first question that I was asked to ask goes back to the conversation that was going on before I asked that we go back to the question that was asked, which was, and I'm just reading it straight off the paper, why do conservatives and Republicans always talk about mental health and behavioral issues related to guns, but they refuse to fund better health care, including mental health services? So I was asked that. Hit it.
It isn't a matter of not wanting to. It's about obviously funding. You can go to any state in the union, even those that have every tax in the world, and they have the same funding shortages for certain things. So just understand that, okay? The thing about the red flag laws is I think it's just a way of getting at this issue to try to take the right people away from guns. Now, in terms of what was said before about making the schools free of guns, just understand you're making it a soft target, okay, for people. Now, what else would you call it? What else would you call it? I mean, I came here thinking we were going to have an open conversation about how to make schools safer, right? I mean, there's all sorts of things that need to be discussed openly, not just assault weapons. I mean, it seems like everybody wants to talk about assault weapons because it doesn't. Listen, I took a look at all the gun shootings over the last couple of years in schools, and a lot of them were handguns. They weren't assault weapons. Okay, if you want to make your schools safe, you got to open it up beyond assault weapons. It's not all assault weapons. It's handguns too. So I'm trying to paint the picture for you that the issue is more than assault weapons. There's ways of trying to prevent these kind of horrific situations, and if we just focus on assault weapons, you're not going to get to the answer. You students are still not going to be safer.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Oh, we have a student who wants to speak.
A point of clarification. Were you saying that the reason that New Hampshire focuses on more relaxed gun regulations rather than the healthcare that was suggested is because of a lack of funding? Was that what you were?
No. Understand that laxer regulations have nothing to do with gun violence. Just look at Chicago. You got plenty of gun violence. You have the most strict gun laws in the country. So there's no correlation. Again, I'm an engineer. I look for logical reasoning for things, and I don't see a correlation there.
So I'd just like to ask Representative Abrami, in relationship to the red flag laws, would you see that it would also come with a component of counseling and psychological support for those individuals who have been red flagged? Because it doesn't seem to me it's enough to just take the guns away from them.
Yeah, I could see it being a more comprehensive bill in that way.
So the original question is, why do the people who want to say that the answer to this problem is mental health, why don't they fund mental health? And what I heard you say, it's a matter of funding. And you know as well as I know, every legislator here knows that our job is all about prioritization. And so my question, these assault rifles, they are not for hunting. They are absolutely no good for actual self-defense. They are for mowing people down. And the people who have them because they think that they're cool and they like to shoot things with them. So it's a hobby. It's what I will call a weird hobby. But it's a hobby, and my question is, why are we prioritizing a weird hobby over protecting the lives of our citizens?
Great. We didn't hear from you yet.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily, I would call it a hobby, but it's an interesting hobby. Coming from being a veteran, having 20-odd years in law enforcement.
Speak into the microphone. Yes. Thank you.
The assault weapons now I'm still looking into it, the Parkland shooting. And talking about counseling, that person had been in counseling 3 different times. And because of that, they would not arrest him. If he had been arrested, he would have had a record and he wouldn't have been able to buy the weapon. So it goes back to my thought process was that if I had a weapon and set it on a table, it's not going to harm anybody. It needs someone behind it. And I look at that as the breakdown of the family, the gaming industry in Hollywood. They're all preying on minds that aren't all developed yet.
Lovely. Thank you. Go. One more comment, and then we're going to switch to a different question. Thank you.
I would just, some of the components that you were noting there, like the gaming in Hollywood, et cetera, access to guns, I don't think, is something that will ever be taken away in the United States of America, and I wouldn't argue that it should be. So the assault rifles aside, if guns are out there and schools are soft targets, what is the answer that follows after that? And I have to bring it back once again to a community of people who are working and living together, who are watching out for each other. That's a culture that's created over a course of time. It's a process, and it's not something that is finished or final. It's an ongoing process. It's a hear something, say something, which I will admit is actually a term or phrase that's been used at our school, but I think it's a simple phrase that works. It's an invitation to the rest of the people in that community to watch out for each other. It takes a village, right? And I think that that's a component of our society and our culture that we have left behind, and that we need to revisit again. I don't think that it's the end-all be-all solution. Of course, there is still vulnerability in that, but I don't think that that saying that it's the gun's fault or it's the school's fault is the answer to all of this. I think it's going to take a community of people to be around each other. When I keep hearing talk about students with mental disabilities, I'm sorry. I think that that seems to me to be something that we're imagining taking place or being treated off campus. But these students are coming into our schools, and there need to be people there that are dealing with them and seeing them and giving them a home and a place that might not be actually happening in their home that they go home to after school.
Great.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I wanted to switch to, there are 2 related questions that I think come out of what you just said about community building. So on the strength of that, I also have been asked to talk to you all about heckling. Yeah, so that consider that my talking to you about it. Right? But there are 2 questions that are about building community. So one is one came from a citizen and a student, although students, you're citizens too. Right. So this question, number one, I'm interested in local solutions that bring our community together to address the social and emotional well-being of our students. How do we get programs in place, such as high school students creating skits on See Something, Say Something, or mentor programs? So this question, how do we get programs in place? And a related question, and this is, I think, also looking at the students specifically, what are your plans to maintain the momentum of this panel in future meetings, rallies, etc.? So I thought this was a good question rather than waiting for the end, right? Like, what do we do now? Like, let's talk about that now while our energy is hot. Yes? Yeah. All right. Hit it, students. Or anyone who wants to talk to the question about local solutions that bring our community together to address the social and emotional well-being.
So yeah. Oh, did you? Okay. So basically, I have been. I would, I guess, like to say, like one of the newer pioneers of, trying to engage our community at Phillips Exeter on mental health. And I've been trying to do a lot. I've been talking to the administration. I've been talking to a lot of students. And honestly, the answer is just do it. There's no special, answer that you can have. Oh, we need to bring tons of outside programs, which are helpful. We need tons of funding for it. No, all we need in our schools is students who are dedicated enough to actually take the time to talk to teachers, take the time to talk to the administration, take the time to go and create a club and create, like for example, I'm creating a committee in our student council to address mental health on campus and get other students engaged, force them to look at the issue. Force your community to make a change. And that's really the way to do it. If you just have the momentum and willpower, you can get anything done. It doesn't take anything special.
Sure. So this is something that I'm going to address what the question is. As community, we have pretty nice communities. Let's face it, Stratham, Exeter, we have great communities. But guess what? They're under assault from the outside. I mean, Representative Gordon touched on it. There's a coarsening of our society that's all around us. I mean, these video games are unbelievable in terms of head counts. You count, you're shooting up people, and it coarsens people. It makes reality kind of it disappears, and it's a coarsening that's not good for all of us, not good for our community. So yeah, I applaud you for trying to do what you're going to do, but we got to try to control some of these outside influences on our community.
That's actually proven to be untrue by a lot of studies, and maybe Dr. Korn can add to that. The video games have made if you're going to shoot up a school, playing a video game isn't going to be the factor that makes you do it.
It's multi-factored, my son. I mean, it's multi-factors. There's so many issues surrounding it. It's a multivariate problem. It's not a singular issue that's causing these problems. And I'm just bringing up another issue, which is the coarsening of society. And believe me, society is a lot more coarse than when I was growing up in the 50s.
Can I jump in down here?
Oh yeah. So on the So on the end and then over real fast.
I try to be fast. First of all, I do want to acknowledge, in terms of heckling, I want to acknowledge the Republicans and the Conservatives who have shown up, because I know it's really hard to go into the Lion's Den and have that courage. I, for one, do appreciate you coming to have a discussion, but I vehemently do disagree with you. As far as the video games and the culture of violence, look at the European countries, look at Australia, look at Japan. They all have the same kind of media that we have. They have very similar cultures, westernized cultures. They do not have gun deaths like we do, because they don't have the guns.
Yeah, I want to totally agree with that, Ellen. All these other societies, I'm not in favor of violent video games, but they have them too. They don't have the violence. We have the guns. We have the guns, we have a gun culture, and if we don't make inroads into the gun culture in our society, and the gun culture is supported by NRA, and the NRA, unfortunately, has co-opted, I'll be very frank, co-opted the Republican Party in this country so that we don't have a Republican Party anymore. We have a national Republican organization that is one and the same. So we can't deal with these issues. The only issues, yes, the Republicans are in favor of complaining about mental health, but they don't support it. Yeah, when I came to this state in 1974, we had the top mental health state in the country. We're not even close to that now. It hasn't been supported by our legislature. It's not a priority. It ought to be a priority, but we also need to have a priority of figuring out what is contributing to the gun violence in our country, and it's multifactored. It's not just we need red flag laws. Yeah, red flag laws would be a very good idea. So would registering firearms and licensing people who have firearms and making sure that they're safe for our communities.
Great. All right. Thank you. You had it on the end.
Hi.
And then we're going to move to another question.
Yeah, thank you. So the question was, what can we do to promote social and emotional health in our communities? And so I wear 2 name tags tonight. One, because I am an elected representative in Stratham, but also I work for Haven, which is our local domestic and sexual violence crisis center and violence prevention education. And we go out into the schools, and I'm really thrilled because I actually see some students who have gone through the Safe Kids, Strong Teens program. And we talk about and create these safe spaces for students to talk about exactly some of the things that Representative Abrami is talking about. And with one thing, we can agree that this is systematic, and we should approach it systematically, and we should recognize patterns. And one pattern we can recognize that, yes, there is a coarsening of our exchanges, but there's also incredible access when our exchanges become coarse and become heated and become explosive. That is exactly the wrong time to have access to a firearm, and exactly the wrong time to be able to buy a firearm at will. It takes more effort to buy Sudafed in our state than it takes to buy a firearm, and that's not okay. And so engaging with things like the Safe Kids, Strong Teens program, reaching out for help, or connecting somebody you know that is in crisis with help, working with places like Connors Climb here in Exeter and getting involved with your student organizations, all of those things create the community that we love. Doing things like this and being here tonight create this community, because we're all going to walk away having participated in something great tonight and having been heard. But we also systematically have to create a community where accessing firearms is hard. It should be hard. Where you have to register to get a firearm. Where you have to not have been a domestic abuser. Where if you have had a restraining order against you, you shouldn't be able to buy a firearm. Where you can't list on Craigslist, hey, I have a gun for sale and I can meet you at the Me and Ollie's parking lot and we can exchange that and it's totally legal. All of those things are not okay. And those are things that we have to do to make this community better.
All right, thank you. All right. Okay, so we have 2 questions about, is it Sig Sauer? Is that how you pronounce it? Sig Sauer. All right, let's go. All right, so there are 2 related questions. So the first question is, how can we work with Sig Sauer on this issue when the economic consequences can be significant? And the other question, to all elected officials on panel, have you ever taken campaign contributions from Sig Sauer? Yes or no?
Believe it or not, first off, I've never owned a gun, I've never fired a gun, and I've never held a gun. And I've never taken money from the National Rifle Association or Sig Sauer.
I pay for my own campaign.
So I think I've had the opportunity to visit Sig Sauer, and I would suggest that more people should go there and take the tour of their facility. It's very informative. It is extraordinary. They manufacture at least 500,000 guns every year. What I was told when I was there, that they only provide those guns to police and to the military. So one thing we need to make sure is that we hold them to that, all right? That there are aspects of our society that have been trained to help take care of us and keep us safe. So let's make sure that they continue or keep the faith with what they have stated, because I'm not sure that that's actually true, but that's what they profess to say. So let's hold them to that. You know, the other thing is, I think we should recognize a business like Dick's that came forward on their own right after Parkland and said, we're not going to sell guns to anyone under 21. We're not going to sell bump stocks. I can't remember what else, but what? Assault weapons, right. You know, so let's support those businesses that are in line with what we think needs to happen, and not just take it for granted, because they're probably experiencing a loss of business. They're probably experiencing a lot of negative publicity in some areas, but I wonder how many of us have reached out and said, you know, we're really glad that you did that, and we're proud of having you in our community. So that's, you know, when we talk about community, we need to be supportive of those entities that are trying to create a change in our culture.
I had actually once. What? Yeah.
I think you mentioned earlier something about a question saying, will the momentum of the panel be carried on? There is a walkout on April 20th, and if anybody would like information, you can talk to me. And the website is indivisible.org.
Yes. So yeah, the questions were to the students, what are your plans to maintain the momentum of this panel after today? Oh, go ahead.
I would like to add my own efforts into this gun reform issue. If we're going to talk about gun violence and if we're going to talk about gun reform, then we need to acknowledge that this issue is intersectional. A bullet can go through anyone, no matter what color you are. And I think that issue has not been brought up in this conversation, and it should be. I and Miss Marshall are the only woman of color here in this panel, and that says something. It says that there is a lot of white privilege here. And I, for one, have not seen how that has affected the movement, because as far as I'm concerned, the Black Lives Matter movement was about gun reform. And I did not see... Thank you. I did not see a lot of white allies. My school, in fact, we did not support the Black Lives Matter movement. We did not go to a march, but we did in fact go to the one for March for Our Lives. That says something about how people of color are seen here in this community and on my campus. and I am trying to make this issue intersectional. But I had to acknowledge that I can't do it without white allies. And so I am asking you all, and I'm asking legislators here, I'm asking every white person here to stand up for me, stand up for Miss Marshall, stand up for people of color who need you.
Is there anyone on the panel who would like to speak to the role of talking about white supremacy and patriarchy in these gun discussions?
All I can say is, wow. Listen, I guess I'm white. My mother was born in Italy. She came over here when she was 2. I grew up in a working class family with a union. My father was a union carpenter. I've earned everything that I've earned. I've worked very hard all my life. So, am I white privilege? I worked. Working hard is white privilege? Oh boy, I give up. I give up.
Thank you, sir. Amen.
I would have something to add.
Amen.
May I?
Oh, yes.
Yes. New Hampshire is very privileged. It is also very homogenous. I come from Memphis, and I had culture shock coming here. It's very, very white, and it's very, very affluent. And we can't say those things are not connected. And yes, it is white privilege to be able to work for something and get the rewards for your work, because very many people in this country work themselves to death and do not get the same rewards. So yes, that is white privilege.
Great. Oh. Yes. Oh, don't forget to talk about patriarchy and toxic masculinity. But there was somebody else.
I'm going to jump in on that one because I work with that every day. That is my every day. So thank you, Khalidria. Thank you so much for calling us out. Thank you. And what do we know? What we know is that for women, that the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases lethality by 500%. And what I know from the work that I do is that women of color and immigrants in our community have a far higher barrier to get over to access services that are available, and there are few. There are few. So we know that domestic violence is something that happens behind closed doors. It is something that affects entire families. It's something that affects entire communities. And when we do work with people who are seeking help, one of the first questions when law enforcement responds to a domestic violence situation is, are there weapons in the home? And for women, we know that even if the weapon is theirs, they're 50% more likely to be hurt with their own weapon. And for women of color and for immigrants in our community, weapons are used for intimidation within the home at an even higher rate. And so I thank you for calling that to all of our attention tonight.
All right, let's get to. Okay, yes. So one more comment, and then we have a question about the black market.
Okay, so yeah, I want to comment on that because I think it is hard for people, many people who are white, to appreciate that we're not colored. And so we haven't had the discrimination that colored people and Latino people have experienced in our country, because we just haven't. So, but it's important to imagine yourself not white, if you are white, and imagine what it's been like. Now, in terms of gun violence, you're much more likely to be killed if you're black, in the United States, percentage-wise, than if you're white. And you're much likely to have had better educated parents. And there are a lot of things that we take for granted that we really should think about. That's all. That's one of the things what white privilege means.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, all lives matter. Color doesn't get into it. And
Black lives matter too, just as much. That's the whole point of that.
And the press will publish facts on white on black shootings, but black on black shootings just never make it into the paper. And that is a very strong presence in Chicago that I know of. Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers with me.
Okay. Thank you. All right. And also know that if we don't get to everybody's question, because we are coming up on 8:20 or so, and we want to have time for a closing statement as well. Is Greg doing the closing statement? You still will have an opportunity to ask your questions of the panelists. But there were a couple of, as what the Exonians call clarifying questions. And this was about access to guns. So question 1, how should the black market for guns be addressed? That was question number 1. And then this is just a related question. With the emphasis on background checks and gun registration, is there any legislation in the works to limit online sales and gun shows?
Not yet.
The answer is no.
Next year.
Next year?
Yeah.
Okay. You want to speak? Yes.
Just to address the black market issue, this is something that plagues communities across New Hampshire, especially in urban areas where we see the linkage between the trafficking of drugs, of illegal guns, and gang activity. And what we need are more resources for law enforcement to be able to patrol hotspots, to take illegal guns off the streets, and to keep our communities safe. So these markets are there, and we need to make sure that we give our law enforcement officers the tools they need to do the patrols and to go after those that are trafficking these. But as we experience this opioid crisis, these things go hand in hand. We're seeing guns being traded for drugs and vice versa in communities like Manchester and even communities on the seacoast that are smaller where you wouldn't think this is happening. I want to say something as well, that this discussion and the action that is needed after this should be about lifting everyone up and about empowering the voices of those who have something to say in this debate. You know, there's no accident that the industry is controlling our elected officials, yet 95% of people support universal background checks. And that disconnect is there and it's real. And if we're going to get something done, it takes more than the adults. Because as we've heard time and again lately, the adults have failed. And the fact is, we've got some really inspirational, dedicated, determined kids here. We've got to continue to lift them up, make sure their voices are heard, and that we can get something done as a result. So thank you.
As for the black market question, I have had lots of discussions with people about gun violence and gun regulation that should or could follow. And I think that the black market idea is a very easy thing to jump to, but I don't think that we as citizens really understand what the black market is online or not online. Like, it isn't the gun shows. It's very difficult to buy guns on this said black market. You need to know a significant amount about like computer science. And I think that's a very understated thing. And it's a very easy conclusion to jump to, that if we regulate guns, people who want guns are still going to get them through the black market, but that's not entirely true. It's very difficult to still be able to access guns through this said black market, which is a very vague term that everyone likes to use.
Yeah. So to put some statistics to that, so if you look at the past 30 to 40 years, so over 50% of the mass shootings that have happened with guns that have been obtained legally. So whenever someone from the NRA will say, okay, if we ban guns, people are still going to get illegal guns. Well, more than half of the mass shootings that have happened for decades actually happened with legally obtained weapons. And if you want to bring it to the state of New Hampshire, just to give some facts, we have, like, you're allowed to give, for legal weapons, if you think of children, the people who are frankly kids who shoot up schools, they might say, oh, you can get that on the black market. Anyone can get something on the black market. And even if you're underage in the state of New Hampshire for getting a weapon, you can actually give a handgun, which was mentioned by some of our other panelists and our legislators as an issue. You're allowed to give a handgun as a gift to a child as long as it's just from your parent in the state of New Hampshire, by the way. So, there's a lot of laws and a lot of loopholes that allow legally obtained weapons to be the source for a lot of these mass shootings and even in domestic disputes and domestic violence. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. You wanted to speak?
No, I've something to learn.
Just to touch on the people of color again, it sounds like here what we talked about, we're trying to turn them into statistics and numbers again. That's what I'm hearing. Because I'm hearing, oh, I don't have the statistics with me, I don't have the numbers with me. These are lives. Okay, we can't talk about it and then say, oh, I don't have the statistics. You can throw statistics about guns or about how, you can throw statistics of how many guns there are and how many disputes there are, but when you talk about these people, you can't just simply call them a number. You can't do that because you're depersonifying them. And this applies to all situations, but that's what I'm hearing from some of these panel responses, and it makes me sad to hear that we're still thinking of them just as numbers and statistics.
Y'all ain't want to say nothing? Y'all? Okay. I'm asking y'all want to say something. That's all right. Okay. So we have another couple. I'm trying to group the questions as best I can. So a question about definitions. So question number 1, AR-15 is not an assault rifle. So how do we clarify the law? I ain't write this. Somebody wrote that. 2, how do you view the role of assault weapons versus sports rifles, such as biathlon rifles? Okay.
Biathletes don't use assault rifles. They don't. They use a long gun.
So
There you go. There's your definition.
I think that, one of the barriers is that we get hung up on defining something, and are we using the right vocabulary? I think that we should focus on the fact that what we want to do to start with is we want to stop those weapons being in the hands of individuals that has the capacity for mass shootings. No, that's the first step to take, and whatever guns fall underneath that, that where you can take down 20 or 30 people in less than a minute, those are the guns that we need to focus on first, because the kind of havoc that they're creating is something we simply cannot continue to tolerate.
Oh, yes.
So, I think most of the people here or all of us, are interested in reducing gun violence. Unfortunately, in New Hampshire and in the federal government as well, right now, there is not a climate. There are no bills, or essentially no bills, And so we need to build a momentum from here to the future, because it's not going to happen right now. It has to happen, it has to build. And so for students, for adults who are with you, we need to be going forward. And that's what we're here for. So that's enough.
Back to the definition and how we delineate between these different weapons. I do think the key in that is the number of rounds that can be fired in a minute. I think some of the high-end weapons do as many as something like 1,000 rounds a minute. It's obscene. As far as the biathletes or other serious hobbyists, this goes back to the licensing and registration. If you are a serious hobbyist, it seems like you would take a certain degree of pride in your hobby, go through the background checks, go through psychological screenings, go through the courses that you need to go through, get the license, get the registration, and then have your hobby. I don't see a problem with that.
Yes, please.
Actually, we're just talking a lot about the future here as it gets kind of peppered into discussion. And I was curious, it was mentioned earlier by Betty, the April 28th date for the student or the walkout, or not a walkout, but the 20th, I'm sorry. What are your intentions? What are your goals? What do you guys see in that particular future? How can people in this community help? What does it? What are your plans? What does that look like?
Let them know, Betty.
It's to bring attention to this issue, and people can help by parents can support their children in it, and you can talk to your teachers and do research. And I'm nervous.
It's okay.
You are laughing.
Do any other students on the panel have information about the walkout that maybe they want to talk to the group about?
Thank you. Me and Jordan are a part of the walkout at PEA, also on April 20th. And as far as I see it or how I view it, it's about uniting us, because a lot of us are international students, and a lot of us come from places like Las Vegas, and I am actually from Florida. So it's just for us to get our voices heard.
Yeah, I agree. The purpose of this walkout versus the last one, I agree that it's more about uniting us and coming together to take action, really, and have discussions and kind of influence our teachers and let them know that we care about this issue and we're willing to do as many walkouts as we need to address it. And so, the 20th.
The 20th is the 19th anniversary of the Columbine shooting.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are two walkouts. The first one of which was March 14th, which was the one exactly a month after the Parkland shooting, which was primarily to address that specific shooting and to respect those who died in that shooting, and then to bring that forward into more of the whole movement of overall gun violence. The April 20th is more generalized around all gun violence that has happened, all mass shootings, rather than just the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas high school shooting.
Did you have something to add? Oh, okay. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, so much. Don't leave. Don't leave yet. Don't leave, right? We ain't done yet. All right. So I want to thank all of the panelists, thank everyone who asked a question, but we have some closing remarks. So let's continue to listen.
Hello, everyone. We would like to end tonight by saying thank you to all the panelists for informing us on the different aspects of gun violence that affect our community. So a big round of applause for them. And And we would also like to thank the volunteers who helped put this together in Water Street Bookstore as well, because that's super important. So thank you. And it is important that we talk about these issues so there's no longer a stigma and that it's scary to talk about. And we want to create change. That's the reason that we're here. So the audience, thank you for being here as well. Thank you for being respectful and asking the tough questions. That was amazing. And to everyone whose question didn't get answered, we are trying, the students will be here afterwards, and I'm sure some of the panelists maybe could stay afterwards for a couple of minutes as well if you have any questions. And tonight, change was made, so congratulations, guys. Thank you for starting the conversation. So we changed our beliefs and we changed the hearts in our community for a need to action instead of inaction. So we have inspired you to act tonight, and I hope that you consider that. So respond to the call, whether it may be in the SAU 16 area, the state of New Hampshire, or nationwide. Just go for it. We listened, and now it's time to act and to do something about what we heard. Thank you, guys. So, to go on the voting, we also have pamphlets made by our lovely Ava Laponis about how to register to vote if anyone would like one. So, thank you, guys.